And turn to the center pages as we continue our series on the habits of happiness. Now, most people think that happiness is simply a matter of luck, right? Sort of like they think that if you're happy, you just got lucky. Because maybe they think that, well, you just have happy circumstances around you. And because you have happy circumstances, well, congratulations for you. And the rest of us, we don't have those circumstances, so we don't get to be happy. But actually, happiness can be learned. Happiness is a quality that you can learn that doesn't waver according to circumstances. Now, I'm going to illustrate this to you because there are certain characteristics, qualities, if you like, that if you learn them, your happiness in life will go up exponentially. And the flip side being that if you don't have these qualities in your life, your unhappiness will go up exponentially. Now, maybe you've never thought about this before, but if I mention to you certain qualities, you will automatically know what I'm talking about because you can instinctively separate in your mind between things that lead to happiness and things that lead to unhappiness. So help me out with this. Let's imagine we've created two columns. We have the happiness column and the unhappiness column. So I'll give you a few sort of words, and you tell me if they go in the happiness column or the unhappiness column. Okay. How about this one? Impatience. Where does impatience go? In the unhappiness column, right? That's pretty simple. People that are impatient are typically not very happy. But the flip side is that if you're more patient, you'll get more happiness in your life. Here's another one. Cruelty. Clear, right? Cruelty goes in the unhappiness column. But kindness, the opposite of cruelty, kindness clearly goes in the happiness column. This is all kind of obvious stuff, right? Let me give you another one just to keep you going. What if I say arrogance? You see, arrogant people are they're unhappy. That's why they're projecting their arrogance, right? People who are always bragging, that's from a deep insecurity, right? And it's weird because when we meet people like that, the last thing we want to do is encourage them. Because we think, well, they already think great about themselves. Look at him, his head barely fits through the door. That guy's so arrogant. But the reality is that the reason he is that way is because he's deeply insecure. And the weird dichotomy is that he needs more encouragement than anyone. But you don't want to give it because you think it's feeding his problem. And so humble attitudes lead to more happiness. So here's what we're going to do today as we continue through the book of Philippians. I'm going to show you 4 very important qualities that you need to build into your life. Because listen, happiness is a serious business. And if you really want to be happy, you have to build these qualities into your life. So we're starting in Philippians chapter 2. We've been going through this verse by verse, and I think we've made it to verse 19. And we're going to try and get down to verse 30. So let me read it to you, and then we'll look at it. So it's going to be on the screen. And if you have the YouVersion Bible app, you can find Crosscurrent on there and follow along as well. All right, let's begin. Paul says this, I hope in the Lord Jesus Christ to send Timothy to you soon. Okay, I didn't get very far, so I better stop and explain again the background of what's happening here. The guy that writes this letter is called Paul. He writes much of the New Testament. He's what we call an apostle. He started a lot of the first churches. And he is actually a prisoner in Rome. He's been arrested for preaching, and he's going to face trial. And while he's in prison, he's writing a letter. And this letter that we have is a letter that's going to Greece. Now, he's in Rome, and he's writing a letter to Greece, to a city called Philippi, which is why this is called the letter to the Philippians. The Philippians are the people from Philippi. Now, Paul is writing this letter to the church members in the church that he started in Greece. And the reason he's writing this letter, just so you know the context, is they had sent to him a care package. The church in Greece had sent a package to Rome, and included in that was a financial gift to help him through. Paul is in prison. He's waiting to appeal his execution before the Caesar, whose name was Nero. Maybe you've heard of him. And so Paul is writing back to the Philippines to thank them for the money that they'd sent. That's the context, right? So let me read that again. And so he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I may be cheered or happy, that's the theme of our series, that I might be happy when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him, that's Timothy, who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone else looks after his own interests and not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he served me in the work of the gospel. That's the good news. I hope, therefore, to send him, Timothy, as soon as I see how things go with me. And I'm confident that I myself will soon. Now, what is he talking about? I love that he's in confidence. Now, he's in chains in a prison, tied 24/7 to a guard, facing potential execution, and he says, but I'm confident that I myself are going to come see you. I'm going to come soon. But in the meantime, this is his plan. Follow it with me. He says, but I think it necessary to also send back to you Epaphroditus. We've got a new character. Now, this is kind of a long name for a Greek male. Greek males usually had very short names. But this is a man called Epaphroditus. He said, I think it's right, we should send him back to you, Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, who's also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. See, when the Philippian church sent the care package to Paul, they sent it with this man. This man, Epaphroditus, was the carrier of the package. And Paul says, I think that I'll send him back to you now. Why? He continues. He says, for he longs for all of you. Because this is his home church. He longs for all of you. And he's distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill and he almost died. Now we're going to learn about that. Like, on the journey from Philippi to Rome, Epaphroditus had some issues and he almost died on the journey. It says, but God had mercy on him, and not only on him only, but also on me, to spare my sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I'm all the more eager to send him back to you, so that when you see him again, you may be glad. That's happy. That you may be glad and that I may have less anxiety. Welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor men like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ, risking his life to make up for the help that you could not give me. So here's what I suspect happens. If you're reading a Bible, and by the way, if you don't own a Bible, we have Bibles here, and we're happy to give you one. You can make it your own. Just drop by our guest center. But if you're reading the Bible and maybe you get to this part, I don't know, like this part of the story, you're maybe tempted to be like, why did God put this in the Bible? Like this part. It's like there's a guy over here and he's writing a letter to some other people and he's like, hey, thanks for sending the money. Hope the weather's nice. It's like, it just seems like kind of like a postcard. And maybe if you read that, you're tempted to say, I can just skip this part and get to the good parts. There's probably good parts. I'll just skip it. It's just a guy saying hi and, thanks. Hi and thanks. And you'd be tempted to skip it and get to the good part. And you'd be dead wrong. You'd be dead wrong to skip it. Because what we actually have here is more than just a personal note about two guys. In fact, the Bible says of itself that everything written in the Bible is there to teach us by example. There's no parts of the Bible that we skip that don't have something in them for us. It's all there for our benefit. And what I'm going to try and show you is that within these few verses, there are actually four things that if you build these into your life, your happiness will increase. And they're examples of two men, Timothy and Epaphroditus. Timothy and Epaphroditus. And Paul the apostle, the writer, he endorses these two men. Let me just skim through it, and I've highlighted it at the beginning of your notes. But let me just show you. For example, in verse 20 of Timothy, he says, of this letter, he says of Timothy, I have nobody else like him. Now, can we just stop for a second? If the apostle Paul, who's like a superstar in Christianity, he's in the MVP list, he's in the Hall of Fame, this guy's the guy. If this guy who wrote more letters of the New Testament than anyone else, if he says, I don't have anybody else in the world like this guy, then this is a guy worth looking at, right? If he gets the seal of approval from Paul, then this guy, Timothy, is worth looking at. I have nobody else like him, he says. In fact, there are two letters in the New Testament called 1st and 2nd Timothy. And these are letters written to this young man. Then he says about the other guy, Epaphroditus, he says, I want you to welcome him and honor him because he nearly died for the gospel. Paul's telling us, take a close look at Timothy and Epaphroditus. Did you notice in verse 19, the reason why we do this? Why would I take the time at Crosscurrent to look at this little passage? And the reason is because he says this in verse 19, so that I may be cheered. That means happy. That I may be happy. Then in verse 28, he says, so that you may be glad. That means happy. I'm doing this that I might be happy and that you might be happy. And then he finishes down in, verse 28, he says, and so that I may have less anxiety. And I read that and I was like, listen, as the pastor in this church, I want you to be happy. I want me to be happy. I want us all to have less anxiety. So let's have a look at Timothy and Epaphroditus. Because Paul's telling us, take a good look. And when you take a good look at these two men, you're going to discover that there are 4 habits that will increase your happiness and increase the happiness of those around you. Let me give them to you if you're taking notes. The first one is this. Here's the first thing you want to build into your life. Number 1 is you have to learn to shift the focus away from yourself. If you want to be happy, you got to learn this habit of shifting the focus away from yourself. This is where it all starts. I've got to learn to care more about the needs of other people than just myself. Because if I'm just thinking, me, myself and I, you know what? I'm going to be unhappy all my life. If it's just about trying to meet my needs and trying to find somebody who'll meet my needs, you'll be disappointed all your life. And so Paul says of Timothy in verse 20 and verse 21, he says this, I have no one else like him who takes a genuine interest in your welfare. For everyone else looks out for his own interests. Would you say that's true of most people today? Everyone looks out for their own interests. Honestly, there's not that many people who are looking out for your interests. Do you even know who they are? Can you count on one hand or one or two individuals? Like really, there's only one or two people who are really looking after your best interests. Most people are looking for themselves. I'm the same. I mean, honestly, naturally, in my natural flesh, I don't tend to think about you that much. I don't wake up in the morning and think, well, I wonder if he's having a bad day. I'm thinking about myself. I'm just trying to survive each day as it comes. I'm selfish the same as everyone else. Because what we're talking about is not what's natural. What's natural is to think of yourself. But guess what? Happiness is not very natural either. You want happiness, you have to do what's unnatural. And part of that, the way that God wired us, is that we find happiness in giving ourselves away. Like the words of Jesus recorded in the book of Acts when he says that it is more blessed, which means happy. It's more happy to give than to receive. Now notice what he says about this guy. He says, there is no one else like him. In other words, unselfish people are very, very rare. He says, I don't have anyone else like him who genuinely cares about you. Who genuinely cares about it. Now, it's funny. Have you ever been like at a reception, a work party, maybe at a fundraiser or something? You ever been at one of those and people are all standing around, and they've got these little, a little toastette in their hand, a little drink in their hand, and maybe like you find yourself with someone and they're talking to you, but the whole time they're talking to you, you can tell they're sort of looking over your shoulder, and they're thinking, who else is there here that I could be talking to? You ever had that experience? Like you're talking to someone, but you sense they're like, is there anyone more important than this schmuck? Can I get with somebody else more than this person? And you see it in their eyes. What's happening there? They're feigning interest. They're pretending to be interested in you and your job and your life. They're not really interested. They're trying to work the room. See, for someone more important than you. Paul says, I don't have anyone else like Timothy who has a genuine interest. Who the Good News translation of this verse says, he genuinely cares about you. But what did he say about other people? He says, other people look out for their own interests. Looking out. What is he talking about? He's talking about focus. And he's saying that the first key to happiness is changing your focus, shifting your focus away from self and onto other people. And again, listen, I'm not saying it's natural. What I'm telling you is it's a habit that you can form. It's something you can learn to do over time. But you have to begin somewhere and you have to make yourself do it. It's a practical thing. So for example, when you enter into a room, normally, here's what you normally do. When you walk into a room, the first thing you're thinking is, do I look okay? Am I put together all right? What are people going to think? That's what you would normally do. But you got to retrain yourself so that when you enter the room, you begin to think, who is there here that I can help? Who is there at church that is hurting? Who is there around me that's giving off those little subtle signs that they need someone? And when you begin to do that and begin to stop focusing on yourself and what you look like and feel like and how everyone perceives you to be, and you get rid of that and you begin to put other people first, your happiness will go up. The Phillips translation, which is another translation of the Bible in English, it says it like this. It says, no one cares about you like he does. And then it says, they're all wrapped up in their own affairs. They're all wrapped up in their own affairs. For those single adults in our church, I want to give you just a little kind of fatherly advice, if I can. It's better to sit at home without a date than to go on a date with somebody who's all wrapped up in themselves. Seriously. It's better to sit at home without a date than to be on a date with someone who's all wrapped up in themselves. To the single female adults, let me tell you this. A man who's all wrapped up in himself ain't no gift. Men, a woman who's all wrapped up in herself is not a gift. He says, these people, they're all wrapped up in their own affairs, and so they're not caring. They're not looking out for the needs of others. Let me show you a verse we looked at last week. It's a little earlier in the chapter 2, verse 4, from the Message paraphrase. It says this, don't be so obsessed with getting your own advantage, but forget yourself long enough to lend a helping hand. If you did that, do you think your happiness would go up? It would. If you would just forget yourself long enough to just help somebody else. But it's not easy. It's really, honestly, it's not that easy to do this because everything in our culture and everything in our nature teaches us to think only for ourselves. I think America is becoming more and more self-centered. I really do. I read this report. They used this computer, and what they did was they studied, this was in America, they studied 1 million books that have been published in the last 200 years, right? So they got this computer, and they did this thing where they could do word searches across 1 million published books. And what they were looking for was to see which words had increased in their use over time and which words had decreased in their use over time. Do you understand? They took a million published books, and the words that are used now more than they ever have are these words: I, me, my, choice, unique, and special. Those words are overused. And the two words that were frequently used in the past, that are very rarely used now: responsibility and prayer. You go back in time, you look at the earliest published books in the country, and people recognized the need for personal responsibility and the importance of prayer. And now all the books are about me, myself, and I. See, it's not natural. We're being raised in a culture that tells us, just look out for yourself. Whatever makes you happy. No one else cares about you, so you just, take care of it yourself. And Paul comes along and he says, that's a sure way to be depressed. That's a sure way to get fed up. That's a sure way to be grumpy about life. It's just trying to me, get all you can all you get. No, he says, turn it around. Turn it around and help somebody else. That's the first habit if you're going to be happy. And the second habit that he teaches us from the life of Timothy, number 2, is this: if I'm going to be happy, I need to become somebody that people will trust. I got to become somebody that people will trust. There's a proverb in the Bible that says that those that can't be trusted are on the road to ruin. Right? It's really obvious that if people don't trust you, you're not going to be happy. But the more people trust you, the happier you're going to be. So we got to learn to be trustworthy. We got to learn to be reliable. You got to learn to be consistent, to be dependable, to develop that quality in your life. Listen, let me give you a practical example. It hurts somebody way less if you just say to them, I'm sorry, I won't make it to that event. It hurts them less to tell them that than to tell them that you'll come and then don't show up. Right? To say you'll come and don't show up hurts a person more than to say, sorry, I can't make it. That's what I'm talking about, just practical things in life. You got to learn to become dependable. Learn to become consistent. Learn that people say, when he says he's going to be there, he's there. When she says she'll be there at 5, she's there at 4:59. When he says he'll pay you back, he pays you back. When she promises that she'll take them to the place, she takes them to the place. It doesn't say one thing and then breaks their word. You want your happiness to go up? Become someone people can trust. Now look at Timothy, verse 22. Philippians 2, verse 22 says, Timothy has proved himself. He's proved himself. Because just like a son with his father, he served with me in the work of the gospel. Paul was saying, look, I've seen this guy in action. I've watched Timothy. I've seen all kinds of circumstances come and go, but this guy, he's the real deal. He's authentic, he's genuine, he's trustworthy, he's dependable, he's reliable. You can count on this guy. And I looked up in another translation, the God's Word translation says this: you know what kind of person Timothy has proved to be. See, it wasn't just Paul, but he knew that the church knew too. He says, you know the kind of person that he's proved to be. I want to ask you the question. What kind of person do people say you are? See, he's proved it. What have you proved? If I was to ask everyone else in the church, what about that guy? What do you think about him? Oh, him? Man, that guy's solid. That guy, he's reliable. When he says he'll be there, he'll be there. When that guy gives his word, you know he's keeping that word. What about her? Oh, her. Oh, my. She's all over the place. Says one thing, does another. Sometimes there, sometimes not. Can't keep a track of life. Unreliable. double, triple books herself, forgets to bring a checkbook. She's flaky. We need someone to volunteer. Ask that guy. What about her? I wouldn't. Is that a reputation? You want to be that one? You want to be the one that people talk about that say, I wouldn't ask him. Honestly, I wouldn't ask him. Why not? No, he's a bit flaky. A bit flaky, that guy. Sometimes, he says something, but, he's proved himself to be unreliable. I'm asking you, what have you proved? He says this guy, Timothy, he's totally proved it. He's verified. He's checked out. He is credible and creditable. If you need a loan, if you go to the bank for a loan, mortgage, buy a car, whatever, what do they always do first? They run a credit check on you, don't they? They run a credit check on you, and what are they doing? They're trying to find out if you are worthy to be trusted with the loan of money. Are you someone who they know will pay back and pay back on time, and they will not lose their money? They do a credit check to see if you are credible or creditable. And here's what I want to tell you. There's a little secret. Everybody is running a credit check on your life every moment. Everyone around you. All the other parents at school, the other people in your office, your neighbors on either side. Every minute of the day, people are running in their mind a credit check on you. Is this man or woman who they say they are? What are they proving with their lives? Or are they phony baloney? Are they faking it? Are they one thing, one place, and one the other? Like, in the old Greek tragedies, they'd have only one or two actors, and what they would do is they'd swap masks, right? So they play a role, they'd run off to the side, grab a different mask, hold the mask in front of their face, and play a different role. That's how they did acting in those days. And the man or woman who wore the different masks, they were called the hypocrites. That's where we get the word hypocrites. A hypocrite is a person who wears one mask one place and another mask somewhere else. He's one person on the golf course and he's another with his kids. She's one person at church and another one at the bar. You don't know who they are because they've mastered the art of being whatever they think people want them to be. And Paul says, you want your happiness to go up? You got to become someone people can trust. Now, how do you become someone people can trust? Well, there are two things that you need to develop. And you can write these down. The first one is, if I want to be a person of trust, number one, I have to live with integrity. I have to live with integrity. And that means that I have to match my actions to my words. I don't just talk a good game, I live the way that I talk. Now, can I clarify? Integrity doesn't mean that you're perfect. Right? No, none of us are perfect. If we had to be perfect to have integrity, none of us would have integrity because we're not perfect. But what is integrity? Integrity is narrowing the gap. It's narrowing the gap between what we're projecting and what we're actually doing. Right? And it's more, let me take this deeper. Integrity is more than just what other people perceive you to be. Integrity is who you are in the dark. Integrity is who you are when only God sees. It's not just about what people see, because that can be faked. It's about whether you're constantly narrowing the gap between the person that you say you are and the person that you really are. The book of Proverbs says this in chapter 25, verse 13. This one kind of made me chuckle. It says, reliable friends who do what they say are like cool drinks in sweltering heat. Refreshing. Isn't that a great verse? People that keep their word. Now, why is that so refreshing? Because not a lot of people do it. Are you a flip-flopper? Are you a flip-flopper? You say one thing, I flip-flopped my thing here. You say one thing one time and another. You've got to become a person of integrity. And the second way that I gain trust with people is I keep my promises. I keep my promises. It's easy to keep a promise that helps you out. Like, me promising to take my son to golf, that's like the easiest promise in the world. Because I want to do it too. But what about this verse in Psalm 15, verse 4? It speaks of people where it says, they always do what they promise, no matter how much it may cost. I actually like this verse in the King James Version. And it says this, it said, God, listen to these words. It says, God blesses the person who sweareth to his own hurt. God blesses the person who sweareth to his own hurt. What does that mean? That means the person who'll keep the promise even if, in keeping it, it hurts them or costs them something. That's like the man who says, you know what? I said I'd do it for that price. I'll do it for that price. Even though between the quote and the result, the cost changed because something happened. But you say, you know what? I said I'd do it for that price. I'll do it for that price because I keep my word. Even though that's going to cost me. I'm not going to make any profit on this job now, but I told you that was the price, and I'm not going to change it. That's what that verse means. It means that when you promise your kid that you'll take them to a place, that you keep that promise even though in the meantime a better option came up. I used to be more, I was an itinerant preacher for a long time. I used to travel all over the UK preaching, different church every week. Hundreds of churches I've been in, all kinds of shapes and sizes, denominations. Never knew what was going to happen. It was quite exciting. It's funny, I'd wear pants and a button down, but I'd always have a tie with me. And then I'd park outside and I'd watch all the congregation go in to assess what the clothing was like and decide whether to put a tie on or not. It's funny, you never knew what you were going. I always had like two versions of the same sermon. The one with the jokes and the one without. But I had this principle, and I tried to always keep it, which was whatever booking, when they call you and say, hey, would you come preach at our church? Whatever booking got in my calendar first stayed in the calendar. Because I was getting requests all the time. And I'd get sometimes 3 or 4 requests for the same Sunday. But I made this rule for myself, and I said, whatever one's first in is the one that keeps. And I've told you this before. Whenever you make a decision like that, you'll be tested on it. So this little church in the city of Glasgow, a little old-fashioned Pentecostal church, had 25 people in it. The women had doilies. Honestly, it was like you walked in, it was like stepping back in time. They called me and they booked me for a Sunday night. I said, sure, I'll be happy to come. The next day, the largest church in the country called me and tried to book me for the same night. You don't think I was tempted to say, yeah, that'll be fine, and then call the little church and say, oh, something's come up, I can't come? I was tempted. I was. I'm not going to lie. I wanted to preach at the big church, but I had a rule. I said, the first one in is the one that we keep. I believe God honored me for that. I got another opportunity at another time. And now look at me. Do you keep your promises? Even if it hurts? Paul, the guy writing, Paul's like a superstar in Christianity. He really is. He gets stuff done. But you know what? He also knew that it's better to work together. And so here's the third skill, the third thing that you need to build in your life to be happy. Number 3 is you have to learn to work well with others. And you know what? I'm not sure they teach this so much anymore. And parents, if you don't teach your kids this, I don't know where they'll learn it. But you got to learn to work with others. That's why as parents, right, we teach them, play nice and share your toys and put your toys away together. And we start early on teaching them to work together. And Paul's going to use Epaphroditus as an example to say, your happiness will go up if you play as a team, if you work together, if you collaborate. And there's 2 ways, again, that you can write down in how to become a better team player. First is this, learn to cooperate. Write that down, learn to cooperate. We teach our children to do this, but we also ought to be teaching them how to cooperate with people who are different, who think differently, who have different personalities, who come from different cultures. And Paul gives this second guy now, Epaphroditus, as an example. Verse 25. Verse 25, Paul says, I send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. If you're using the notes, would you just circle this? Brother, worker, soldier. Remember, this is the guy that the church in Philippi had sent with the gift of money. And Paul says, he's my brother, worker, soldier. What is Paul saying here? This guy's a team member. This guy knows how to work in it. This is not a lone ranger. This is not a prima donna. He's not a maverick. This is a guy who works well with other people. And I tell you this, friends, with real sincerity, the better you learn this skill, the happier you'll be in life. If you do not know how to work well with people, if you don't know how to develop good working relationships, you are in deep, deep guacamole. Because, can I tell you something? Most people in the world are different from you. Most people in the world are different from you. And if you can't learn to work with people who are different from you, you are missing out on a world of opportunity. I made it a habit to tell myself that I can learn something from anybody. I can learn something from everybody. Because you know some things that I don't know. I know some things that you don't know. And the people beside you know some things that neither of us know. And if you take that solo attitude or that arrogant and prideful attitude, you are missing out on learning from people around you. Now notice the words that Paul uses. He uses 3 relational metaphors, and they're all teamwork terms. Did you notice? My brother, fellow worker, fellow soldier. That's cool. I feel Paul could have improved this slightly. I'm on dangerous ground. If he just made them all start with the same letter. And so this is how I would have done it. I would have said, it's a family, it's a fellowship, it's a faith. First of all, it's a family. He calls him my brother. Now, they weren't related by blood. They were related by Christ's blood. You see, the church is a family. I didn't say the church is like a family. Sometimes people say that. Oh, our church is great. It's like a big family. No, we're not like a family. We are a family. That's why some of you don't like each other, because we're a family. And like every other family, there's big families, small families, there's close families, not so close. There's families that argue. We're a family. And he says, this guy's my brother. And listen, the people sitting beside you and near you and across from you, if you're in the Lord Jesus Christ, these are your brothers and sisters. You know, for like 2,000 years, people in churches actually referred to each other as brother and sister. They'd say, oh, there's Brother Bill, and there's Sister Jean, and there's Brother Tom. And I think we could bring that back. We should do that here. I think we've lost something in America of this sense, partly because we have these massive mega churches and we have all this thing like go to the concert. You're my brother. You're my sister. He says it's family. And then he says it's a fellowship. And what does that mean? That means we're working together and we're serving together. That we've been given the same task, that we have the same great commission. We're a family, we're a fellowship. And then he says we're a faith. He says, my fellow soldier. Come on, would you agree with me? Life sometimes feels a bit like a battle. Life is a battle sometimes. You ever feel like forces are against you? Yeah. And we have to battle together against the same enemy, which is Satan or the devil. That's why we need to support each other, why we defend each other, why we encourage each other. And by the way, there's a phrase for that. It's called small group. That's why it's so important to be in a small group. Because that's the place where we learn to be a family. It's the place where we fellowship, and it's the place where we fight for one another when trouble comes. And if you're not in a small group, you're not attached to that. I love in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus said this. It's called the Beatitudes, 8 examples of happiness. And he says, you're blessed or happy when you can show people how to cooperate instead of quarrel and fight. How do we learn to work well with others? I said you have to coordinate, or rather cooperate. And the second way is to learn to be considerate. Write that down. The more considerate you are of other people, the happier you'll be. And Paul is saying, you got to learn to be thoughtful. We've made it down to verse 25. We're almost there. And he's using Epaphroditus still as an example, verse 25 and 26. He says, but now I must send him back to you. What's this? Because he longs to see all of you. And this bit this is brilliant. Seriously, watch this. And he has been worried about your distress since you heard that he was sick. Did you catch that? He was worried about your distress because you heard that he was sick. Come on. How many of us are like that? The rest of us are like, well, I was sick and no one visited me. And I put it on Facebook and I expect the pastor to know. Practical point, I'm not on Facebook. Not on any social media. If you're trying to pass a message to me via Facebook that you're sick or someone died, it's not happening. No one visited me. And I thought, I skipped church for 3 weeks. No one even noticed I wasn't there. It's amazing. He says, he's distressed and worried that you're distressed that he was sick. Isn't that a real depth of character right there? He's not focusing on himself and thinking, I wonder if they're worried. He's like, I'm worried that they're worried about me. And so I want to go back to let them see that I'm okay and I didn't die. Right? That's called consideration. Paul says this in another letter, 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, same writer, but he says this, you must get along with each other and you must learn to be considerate of one another, cultivating a life in common. Now notice, I want to point out 3 things. First of all, he says, you must get along with one another. He didn't say you might or you could try. He says you must get along with each other. But then he says, learn to be considerate and cultivate a life in common. So we got to do it, but he acknowledges you have to learn to do it. And cultivation, that's like, if you've ever tried to grow plants or vegetables in your garden, right? You cultivate it. He says you got to learn it and you got to cultivate it. In other words, it's not natural to do these things, but we have to learn them. Most problems in relationships today, what I think maybe the biggest issue in marriages is this. They stop working. Marriages just stop working. And if you stop working on your marriage will stop working. Any relationship. There's no stagnation in relationships. They're either going forward or they start going backwards. You leave them alone, they automatically degrade. You got to keep working on it. What happens is you don't work on it, it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, more people want to quit and throw in the towel than actually do the work. And what is the work? To learn to be considerate, to cultivate a life in common. Now, that doesn't come natural to me. Maybe it comes natural to you, but it doesn't come natural to me. I don't naturally think about how my words are affecting other people. I don't naturally consider other people's feelings before my own. In fact, you even meet people sometimes who say things like, well, I just say what I think. Now, I have a word for that. Rude. And you're proud of that? You're proud of that? I just say what I think. Listen, a parrot can say what it thinks. Any idiot can say what they think, but it takes intelligence and character and maturity to stop yourself and to think, how will these next words affect the people around me? And Paul is an example. He says this, 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 33. He says, I don't just do what I like or what's best for me, but what's best for everyone, so that they might be saved. What is Paul saying? He's saying, I put their conversion before my comfort. I put their conversion before my comfort. We finish with this. The last habit of being happy is I've got to live for something worth dying for. I have to live for something worth dying for. Until you've learned what in life is really important, you can't ever be happy. And how can I explain it? It's like most people are giving first-class allegiance to second-class causes. And those causes are letting them down. I'm going to say that again. That sounded pretty good to me. Most people are giving a first-class, what did I say? Allegiance to second-class causes. And those causes are letting you down. In other words, you take all that energy, you take all that time you're spending, all that money you're investing, all that mental energy that you're putting into something. And it's like, what is that something? Is that something going to matter 5 years from now? Or 20 years from now? Or 1,000 years from now? No. That hobby you have, no, I'm not saying hobbies are wrong, but all that energy, all that money you're spending, all that time and mental acuity for something that's not even going to matter. It says you want your happiness to increase? Live for something that's really worth dying for. Epaphroditus in verse 27 and following, it says of him, it says, he was very ill and he almost died. It says he risked his life for the work of Christ, and he was at the point of death while trying to do for me the things that you couldn't do because you were far away. He was bringing the gift from Greece to Rome. I'm going to finish this in a minute, but I really need to explain this. Do you know how far it is from Philippi to Rome? There's no airplanes, there's no trains, there's no cars. Traveling from Philippi to Rome was over 800 miles. It was 800 miles, and the church in Philippi had gathered around, and they'd taken a financial offering, and they said, we want to help Paul out in the time of his trouble. We need to send this money to Rome. How are we going to get it there? And Epaphroditus said, I'll do it. I'll do it. Send me. He was a guy who said, I'll walk it. I'll walk it. Give it to me. I'll walk 800 miles to take this money to this man. This is a man who found something worth dying for. This is a man who risked his life for the gospel of Jesus Christ. He walked an 800-mile journey. And I don't know about you, that's a challenge to me. And I want to ask you two very personal questions. Because that's what preachers do. We get in your business. And I want to ask you these two questions. What commitment have you started that you haven't yet finished? Like, what if Epaphroditus, who got sick and almost died on the journey, said, you know what, I give up. I'm only halfway there and I'm already sick. I'm just going to go back. What if he did? What commitment have you made? Maybe you've made a commitment to your husband or to your wife. You say, yeah, I'm going to do that. Or there's a project that you started. Or there's something, a promise I'm going to try and change. What commitment have you made, but you haven't kept? What commitment have you made to your kids? Oh, I promise I'll do it. But you haven't kept. And here's my second question. Is your commitment to Christ so deep that you would be willing to risk your life for him? That's not a flippant question. I'm not messing around. Is your commitment to Christ so deep that you would give your life for him? Because most people that I've met, most people who are Christians, most people here in this county, most people in Crosscurrent, if I came to you and said, would you take this offering to this person? It's an 800-mile journey. How many of you would do it? You think God brought you to this church just so you can sit and watch what happens? You see, a lot of Christians, they're like, oh yeah, I love Jesus, I follow Jesus, but there's a really good game on TV today. So I can't come. We can barely even turn up to church consistently. Never mind give our life for something. And anyway, I've used all of my time. I don't believe God called you to Crosscurrent so you can just sit, soak, and sour. But because God wants you to get involved and to put self-sacrifice before security. So let me end with the words of Jesus from Mark chapter 8 and verse 35. He says, only those who give away their lives for my sake and for the sake of the good news will ever know what it means to really live. Let's bow our heads and pray. Let's pray. I want to just summarize what I've just said. The happiest people on earth are caring, consistent, cooperative, and courageous. That's the things we just looked at. They're caring because they get the focus off themselves. They're consistent because they can be trusted. They're cooperative because they work in teams. And they're courageous because they're willing to risk their life. Is that a person you want to be? I dare you to pray the most dangerous prayer ever prayed. Say this: use me. Dear God, use me. Say, God, help me be a person who puts other people first. Help me be a person who's considerate of others. Help me be a person who's committed to Christ. And Lord, whatever commitment that I've made recently that I've still to complete, help me today to go home from church and to keep my word. I pray this in the name of Jesus.